Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Ogle, and this is the second round in a series of election specials that I've been doing. We've had all the major parties on for the first round, and we're now we're just under 2 weeks away from the general election, and so at this hot point, if you like, in the election campaign, we're going to go through and talk to everyone again. Today we have Matthew Turmaine from the Labour Party. Hang on a second. Whoops. Hang on. In a series of election specials that I've been doing, we've had all the way. Sorry about that. That was me not paying attention to the other machine, which was replaying this video. So,
that's all right.
Matthew, come and say hello. Sorry about that.
Hi, hello everyone. Nice to be back.
Good to see you again, Matthew. We did bump into each other once in the high street.
Yes, we did.
Some weeks back, but right, let's get straight into it. I know that there's been a huge amount of interest in this election. We've had lots and lots of hustings. I've not actually been able to make any of the hustings so far, but I don't seem to remember there being so many opportunities for people to engage as there are at the moment.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating experience. So I would say, first of all, don't worry that you haven't had the opportunity to attend one, because there are plenty more still to come. So I think you're right. I think there's been a lot more this year than there has been previously. And I think also there probably seem to be more in Watford perhaps than there are, and other marginal seats, I guess, than there are in other parts of the country. But I think there are two sort of factors in play here. One is that because the fixed term parliament meant that everybody knew when the election was going to take place, it means that everybody who wants to has had the opportunity to try and set up a hustings, or at least, you know, get together with some other people who have similar interests to host a hustings event to get the candidates to. And that, I think that the second thing that is coming into play is partly, I think, as you're saying, you know, the nature of the interest in this particular seat and seats like it. Now, from my perspective, I think this is a brilliant thing. You know, people talk about a lack of political engagement and that people aren't interested in politics. You know, nothing could be further from the truth, given my experience of attending these hustings. I mean, you know, we've had a real mix as well. So the one that was taking place last Thursday, there were over 200 people at it. We've had other hustings that have been, you know, of a particular set of interests where we've had maybe 25 people, 30 people, that kind of thing. But it's all really good stuff. It's giving the public a chance to come and quiz the candidates about what they're interested in, to find out their positions, to find out what their party positions are, and also to learn a little bit more about the candidates themselves. So it's great. If you do want to come to some more, there's one tomorrow night at Queen's School. There's one on Wednesday night, which is taking place at Watford Boys Grammar and is being hosted by the Watford Observer. And then there's the Abbots Langley Methodists hustings, which is taking place on Thursday evening.
Right, okay. And are they going to be attended by all the candidates?
As far as I know, yes. I mean, one of the things that has been quite interesting is that most of the candidates have tried to get to most of the hustings. It hasn't been a uniform attendance at all of them. But certainly, I think I've tried to get to. I think it was one very, very early on that I was out of the country that I couldn't attend. But I've been to all the other ones, so that's good, and that's great as well, because people get to see a range of opinions clearly.
Fantastic. So you're a councillor for is it West Watford?
Yeah, Holywell ward in West.
Holywell. So where have you been out and about campaigning? I mean, obviously the area is quite large. I don't suppose you can cover every part of it, but where have you been? Where have you been out and about door knocking, as it were?
Well, we are doing our best to cover the entire constituency. I mean, you're right, you know, there's what 48,000 households, you know, something like 84,000 people in the constituency. So it is massive, and you can't knock on every door. But Labour has taken an approach to this election that we want to have conversations with people rather than just shoving endless amounts of material through the letterboxes. I would say we are shoving a reasonable amount of material through people's letterboxes, and so that's important so that people get a chance to read about what it is that we're proposing and what we think. But it is that face-to-face contact is vital, and so we have been trying to go to absolutely everywhere. I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, the parliamentary constituency comprises not just the Watford Borough Council wards, but also the 5 Three Rivers ones as well. So it's a big old population, but we've been out and about across the whole constituency, knocking on doors, talking to people, and seeing what they've got to say.
Okay, I mean, have you found that people are already decided which way they're going to vote in general, or are people actually taking the time to ask questions to sort of are they still undecided? I mean, I thinking back on the years with my parents and other people that were of an older generation, that it was like they always voted the same as they always voted, and there was never ever going to change that. And you finding that people are, I think probably the major parties are closer together in the centre than they've ever been. So is there more indecision about which way to vote, would you say?
I think there's a mix. I mean, that point about perception of what the main parties are, what ground they're sitting on, I think that's in some ways that is a popular perception. I mean, in others, I think that there are bigger divides between the parties than there have been for a long time in the past. I mean, a classic example of that would be, the intention of the Conservatives to have an in-out referendum on Europe in 2017, whereas we're saying we're only going to have a referendum if there is a substantive transfer of powers, because what we don't want, primarily for business and certainty and stability and building growth, is to have that level of uncertainty of what's going to happen to our economic future. But having said that, I think that some perception is that there's similarity between the parties on some of the agendas. In terms of how we're finding people, I think there's a mix, to be honest with you. Some people are still very firmly supporting the party that they've historically supported, and other people are undecided. I think there are a reasonable chunk of people who are still to make up their minds, and I think that what's interesting for us is we're watching a transfer of some people who haven't necessarily supported us in the past, who are coming across, which is good, but that's something that clearly builds over time. So I think it is a mix. But if you're saying, can you say that there's less certainty than there was in elections from years ago, then yes, absolutely. I mean, I think those tribal loyalties don't exist in the same way that they used to. And I think also engagement isn't what it used to be either. You've seen a general downward trajectory in turnout at elections, and that's clearly disappointing. In the Labour Party, we've had a few ideas about how we can try and kick that back into an upward trend. So one of those ideas would be extending the age of voting to 16 and 17-year-olds. One of them would be trialling electronic voting. So if we win in very specific circumstances, obviously being mindful of how it will work. But we are going to try that out because we want to see if we can encourage more people to be voting than are at the moment.
Well, that's right. I mean, engage. I think just being on the edge of this, I think there is more discussion. Maybe it's just the people that are around me, but there seems to be more discussion about this election than ever before. Maybe it's the increase in Twitter, maybe the increase in some social media, but there seems to be a lot more discussion going on than ever before. When you said people are moving across to Labour, what are the reasons for that? What are they telling you as to why they're switching?
Well, I think largely because there's two things at play. At the last election, obviously there was a hung parliament, and people were sort of undecided about quite what they wanted. They sort of weren't sold that they definitely wanted the Tories in power, and so you saw the kind of result that we saw. So I think part of it is a result of that lack of previous decision about what they wanted, whereas some people, they're crystallizing their thought now and they're thinking, yeah, no, we definitely want that. And part of it is the experience of the last 5 years. You know, most people have had a very tough 5 years. If you're in the super rich group, then you've actually had a great 5 years. But that isn't the story for the majority of most people's lives and most of the electors in Watford and indeed in the rest of the country, in terms of, you know, the ongoing increase in the cost of living, whether it's energy prices, transport prices, that kind of thing, and the stagnation essentially of salaries and wages along that path as well. So, you know, our figures are showing that people are £1,600 a year worse off year by year under the coalition, and that this is the first time since the 1920s we're going into an election where people are worse off than they were at the start of the Parliament. So, you know, I think that explains part of it. You know, people are thinking, well, do you know what? Labour's proposition is a good one. They've thought about how they're going to do this. They have a fully costed set of proposals. I'm going to go with them.
I mean, I remember the days of it switching backwards and forwards quite often. The trouble is that 5 years isn't very long to deliver a solution. If you're in for 3 terms, you've got a chance to either mess it up terribly or get on some kind of pathway to maybe progress. But I mean, when you talk to people on you know, knocking on the doors, etc., are there discussions about what's going on locally, or do you find that people are really focusing on the national agenda?
Well, again, I think it's a mix, but I mean, I think the most common conversations that we have are how people are locally affected about issues that are of national relevance and national concern. So, for example, the health service, you know, and the implications for their experience at Watford Hospital. The cost of living crisis, obviously a national thing, but what that means for their day-to-day experiences of trying to, you know, afford to pay the mortgage or the rent here in Watford, or their kids being able to get somewhere to live, and you know, what their experiences of the local education services and so on. So I think that is, you know, that tethering of national and local is quite prominent. Some people clearly are only interested in a small local dimension. Some people are clearly only interested in the bigger national picture. But there's you know, people are doing a lot of identification of those the local experience of those national issues, which I think is, you know, that's right. That's what people are going to do. You would expect people to do that. That, you know, we know what's happened nationally. I mean, you mentioned that 5 years isn't a huge amount of time to turn around a situation, but it is enough time to be able to say, you know, we promised to do this and we did the counter opposite. So if you look at something like the NHS, we were promised no top-down reorganisation of the NHS. We've got a top-down reorganisation of the NHS and lots of privatisation taking place. You've got a situation where people said we wouldn't cut frontline policing. They cut frontline policing. We wouldn't put up VAT. They put up VAT. So those are not long-term trajectories that you know, steer a society around social mobility increasing or general trends of improving education or wealth creation. You know, they're specifics that were promised at the last election and have not been delivered on in the way that we were told that they would be.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back in history, I mean, I think every parliament has been guilty of not delivering on some of their promises. You know, this particular situation is no exception. I think that's sure. Probably why there's a general apathy towards believing what politicians say. But I mean, you touched on people being worse off, which clearly has got something to do with the austerity measures that have been implemented, and the focus specifically on paying down the debt, which we've got. And it was interesting to listen to Aidan from the Green Party the other day talking about the focus being on something which hurts, yeah, the vulnerable and the poor in society rather than the rich, who you say have had a bountiful 5 years in comparison. So where are Labour on this? I mean, I've seen bits and pieces, but where are you on this austerity? I mean, obviously you can't keep racking up debts forever, because at the end of the day you can't pay them back. So there has to be some kind of balance, doesn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's, you know, I've spoken with Aidan about this, and you know, clearly he's coming from a very particular perspective. One could say that it's the luxury of knowing you're not going to form the government, so you can say a bit of what you think is going to be popular. But Labour has a really clear position on all of this, which is, we will balance the books, but we will do it fairly. So in our manifesto on page 1, we have a budget responsibility locked into every proposal. So everything that we're promising to do in our manifesto is costed. We know how we're going to pay for it. We know how we're going to deliver it. And we are going to balance the books. We said we'll balance the books over the course of the Parliament. It's interesting. If you look at how the Tories and Lib Dems in coalition took the approach, they said that they were going to wipe out the deficit in one parliamentary term. The Darling plan was to halve it in one parliamentary term. And the reality is that that's what's actually happened. So national debt has gone up from about 800 or 900 billion to 1.5 trillion, whereas what you've got in terms of national debt, that's obviously increasing. It's increasing because tax receipts from companies' profits and tax receipts from income tax aren't growing because there isn't proper growth in the economy. You still have a large social security bill, and I'll call it social security because that's what it is. It isn't welfare. People pay into this system in order to be able to take out at times of need. And I guess, finally, I would say balancing the books is not an austerity agenda. I think there is a difference. Financial responsibility, absolutely, we're signed up to, committed to. We're not going to be borrowing any more money for day-to-day spending if we win the election in May. We will pay off the deficit, but we'll pay off the deficit fairly. So let's not forget, in the last Parliament, on the day that the bedroom tax was introduced and had been voted on 6 times by the Tories and the Lib Dems in government, they gave a tax break of £40,000 to millionaires, every year. That isn't spreading the load fairly. That isn't the people with the broadest shoulders taking the best responsibility for being able to pay it off. So I think we've got a good plan. I think we've got a better plan to be able to deal with the deficit, but make sure that we get growth back into the economy and that it's paid for in a fair way. Those cuts that have been made to people's services have been punitive in some examples. The bedroom tax is just horrendous, but then there's a whole host of other policies that they pursued along those lines as well, in terms of cuts to disabled people, the granny tax and the pasty tax, if you remember that from that disastrous budget. And then, of course, the increase in VAT as well. So, people who have low and middle incomes spend a far higher proportion of their salary on goods that are subject to VAT. The very wealthy do not. They squirrel them away in savings and, offshore accounts and this kind of thing, which is why you said, we're going to go after them and make sure that everyone pays the tax that they're supposed to pay.
Yeah, one of the, I talk to people about the size, if you like, of the tax bill, i.e. how much tax people get taxed from every pound, and it's a lot. It's 45p or thereabouts. And you quiz where that money's being spent, and is it being spent in the most effective way? And I think this is probably the conversation that I personally have most with people is people don't mind paying the tax if the tax was being spent properly. And there's so many ways that perhaps it's inefficient or it's not being spent, it's not supporting the right people. And like you say, people with the money can afford to avoid, if you like, paying tax.
Avoid, let's clearly make it avoid, but yeah, that's avoid. Right.
So that is a criticism, really, is that government is a bit bloated and it's costing, as an overhead, which is what it is it not costing far too much? And are we spending the money the right way?
Well, it's a really good question. So I guess I would say I think there are 2 things to observe on this one. One is that, of course, there are always efficiencies that can be made. If ever you go to use, a service, a public service, or indeed, a private service, come to that, you can always find ways of doing things that are more efficient and can help save money. So, we're not in any way arguing for a lack of efficiency. We're saying we need to find efficiencies in our manifesto pledges in order to be able to deliver what we need to do. But at the same time, a large part of the austerity to date has been efficiency savings, and you can see the consequences of that. You're local, I'm local. You drive around town, you drive up and down, Tulpits Lane and other roads. You can see the state of this public infrastructure. That doesn't suggest to me that efficiency is about not buying too many paper clips or post-it notes are really coming into play here. This suggests to me that there isn't the money being made available to be able to, ensure that our infrastructure is properly working. And there are consequences to this. If you use that example of the state of the roads, there are consequences, because if a pensioner trips up on a pothole, they end up in A&E. That's costing money to the health service. It's using up another bed. It's causing further problems. It's not efficient. It's not productive. If you are a road user, then it's causing damage to your car. That's potentially more expense to you. If you're a cyclist, well, crikey, if you're a cyclist going up and down Tulpits Lane, you're probably finding that you need a new set of wheels every month or two. Now, we've said, these little things do make a difference to people's day-to-day lives. And, we've said that we will allocate £300 million to be able to fix 6 million potholes in Britain over the course of the next Parliament. Now, that can sound amusing or trite and all the rest of it, but it's potholes. But at the same time, this does make a difference to people's lives, and there are consequences to that. So efficiencies are not just about cutting money that's being spent. Efficiencies are about doing things in the right way to be able to make sure that infrastructure works and doesn't cost so much money.
One of the topics that I picked up on, I think it was from the Hustings at one of the schools, was about zero contract hours. And the completely unregulated state of those contracts. I mean, I know that in the high street in Watford, you've got large employers taking people on zero contract hours or apprentice schemes, where actually the taxpayer is effectively funding an organisation to operate at very low costs, so that they can offer goods and services at a price which, makes, to be honest, things like the market uncompetitive. So where's Labour's position on? I mean, there are good use of zero contract hours, and there are obviously those that are completely using them in a sort of very it's a poor way.
So I mean you've hit a nail on the head there, where if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is that largely you and I as taxpayers are subsidising companies to be able to pay lower wages, and that is clearly wrong. We don't think that that's good at all. And I think in terms of zero hours specifically as a manifestation of that, we've said that we're going to reform zero hours contracts. We're going to ban exploitative zero hours contracts, and there are two reasons for this. Firstly, it's important to say we're not banning zero hours contracts altogether, because for some people this is useful stuff. If you want to be a bank nurse, or you're a student who wants a couple of jobs to be able to supplement your income, we'll also cut tuition fees to £6,000. But in those circumstances, you want a zero hours contract. It suits you very well, and that's not a problem. But what we're saying is, at the moment, you have a situation where loads of the jobs that have been created over the last few years are zero hours contracts. And this is essentially just a way to remove people's working rights. If you're an employee and you're working regular hours for month after month after month, delivering good work and good profits for your employer, then you should be entitled to a regular contract. It's as simple as that. And so we've put a time frame on that. We said if you work regular hours for 3 months on a zero hours contract, you will be entitled to ask for a regular contract instead. And I think one of the problems that we've got in our country is this lack of community feel, this lack of compassion in terms of how we're dealing with people who are further down the scale. Now, if you're cynical, you can say that that's because these people often don't go out and vote, and so the coalition government has been able to enact these policies in order to make savings and permit this activity to take place, because they don't really care about them not going out and voting for them. But I don't think it's the right thing to do in terms of how a society should behave and be at ease with itself. It is important that businesses feel that they are a proper integrated part of the fabric of our society. And you can see it on at the top end in terms of the tax avoidance that we were speaking about earlier as well. If I'm an employer and I think that my workforce is working for me very well, it is not unreasonable for me to say, therefore, you should have a regular contract. It's not removing the ability to have zero hours contracts when they are specifically needed or going to be more appropriate, but it isn't really fair to people. You're just removing the rights that they have.
I mean, I think in the care sector, for example, where
it's outrageous.
yeah, the flexibility is required because things change constantly. If you've got a pool of contracted people, but then others that can fill in the gaps as and when, you couldn't probably offer those people anything but a zero contract hour. So it gives flexibility on both sides of the fence, which is what they were designed for, I believe. So,
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
They've just been abused. So you mentioned tuition fees and reducing them down to 6,000. It's an interesting debate, this, and one that I often have at some of our events and about university. And at the time when I could have gone to university, I was accepted, decided not to go. I would have gone on probably a completely funded studying maths, so it'd been a traditional degree. And I talked to a lot of people, and there seems to have been a shift in thinking about university, because in those days I would have thought, if I was going to go and I needed to study for civil engineering or to be a doctor or to be an accountant or a lawyer, then you need quite obviously more years of study to understand and pick up those things. But it almost seems from talking to different people that almost like now university is a rite of passage. And although everybody should have the ability and the opportunity to go to university, when they were first created, they were designed for a much smaller percentage of the population. And people now going to university have a really serious choice to make between, is what I'm going to study going to help me in my life, or am I just doing it because I don't know what to do? But it's a 30,000 or 40,000 pound decision right now.
Well, 44 grand on average, yeah, 44,000 is what people are going to walk out with.
So it's a big decision, and it's one that shouldn't be taken lightly. And obviously the university concept has changed from those days I was talking about there. So reducing the fees will make it more affordable for people to go, but it doesn't change the problem. It doesn't stop the problem, which is why you're going in the first place, and is the thing you're studying actually of real value to your ongoing career?
So, I mean, wow, there's a lot in that question. I'll try and touch on as much of it as I can. I mean, the first thing to say, the context around this has got to be that education is essential, it is vital, and we believe that people should have the best opportunity to continue their education for as long as they can. That doesn't necessarily mean a university route, but that's what we're talking about at the moment. And that's important. And why? Why is that important? Well, it's important, obviously, for those individuals, because it means that they can probably earn more money as graduates, on average, tend to earn more money as a result of having been to university than perhaps people who haven't. It's not exclusive, but that tends to be a trend. And the other reason, of course, is that social mobility is driven mostly by education. So we have a society where social mobility is becoming less common. You are more likely, without wanting to sound terribly old-fashioned about it, to marry within your social class now than you were in the 80s or the 70s or the 60s and so on. And that that social mobility is a way that people can make the most of their lives, so they can really be empowered to do something. And so offering them the opportunity to do that to the best of their ability has got to be a priority for government. I mean, that's what I believe we want as a society. And so a government is supposed to be an enabler of what society wants and where it wants to go. Now, to talk about tuition fees specifically, yep, we said we're going to cut them from 9,000 to 6,000. Obviously, the coalition put them up. We all know the story around the Lib Dems and the tuition fees and so on. But the other thing that we're going to do, which is vitally important, is we'll make sure that university funding is protected. So universities, of course, are thinking, well, quite like these tuition fees coming in because it's guaranteed stream of income, etc., etc. And we'll need to make sure that does happen, because obviously we want our universities to be world-leading organisations of research, making sure that Britain is going to be best placed to be able to make the most of this talent and make the most of the work that's done there. But it is also important to say that we're going to, re-energise what's happening elsewhere in the education system. So, apprenticeships have come into something of disrepute. The government talks about its record on apprenticeships, but it is not a record to be proud of. What we are saying is we will have a gold standard. We will have level 3 apprenticeships available to any kid that wants it if they meet the basic grades, and that is a real vocational educational route for people to be able to make good careers for themselves and learn skills that are going to be able to help them to get a job. Now, of course, we have to have a wider context where they're able to get a job, which we can argue about how easily that's happening at the moment. But that, I think, it's a really fundamental point to make. It's also another point that's worth making on the tuition fees point is that these things need to be paid back, and at the moment they start. I think it's about 21,000. You start repayment. That isn't a lot of money to be earning. Default rates are expected to be really high, and that means that the government will have to pick up the bill because there's an inbuilt time limit on how long you have to pay them back. If you haven't paid it back by that time, they write off the debt. But if they write off the debt, that means again that you and I as taxpayers are paying for it. So it hasn't actually changed what's happening in terms of the ownership of that cost of that education under those circumstances. The Tory argument is, well, why should taxpayers pay for you to go to university? Well, there's a whole host of reasons why that's appropriate in terms of what the benefit that it brings to the wider economy, the benefit that it brings to society, and et cetera, et cetera. But it turns out on these projections, the taxpayer's going to be picking up the bill anyway. So, it doesn't seem particularly fair or sensible to me. We said we'll do right by students and by their families and make sure that, we cut fees so that they're down to 6,000 to encourage more people to go while protecting university funding too.
Okay, interesting stuff. On the back to go around the streets talking to people in general, has immigration and that whole topic of Europe been much discussed with house people on the doorstep?
Yeah, it does come up. I'm not sure that it comes up as much as all the national parties positioning on immigration would suggest, but it definitely does come up. And I think that without wanting to generalise, the issues around concern about immigration are largely related to what people's experience is like of being able to get a job that pays them a decent salary and being able to find somewhere where they can affordably live. Now, tethering those things to levels of immigration is a pretty risky proposition unless you are in possession of some seriously hardcore data and facts and information. But we are where we are nationally with that debate. And I think that, we have a reasonable set of proposals around immigration. We're going to say that you need to contribute if you're coming here from the EU for 2 years before you're able to take benefits out. And we're going to say we'll properly fund the Border Control Agency. So one of the things that's happened over the last few years is that service has been run down rather. It isn't, in popular parlance, we're not able to count who is coming into the country and who is leaving the country properly. So a properly invigorated Border Control Agency will enable us to do that better, which I think is a good thing. But what we're really doing is we have a set of proposals to tackle what the situation around things like housing and jobs and salaries would be. And the other thing we're going to do, of course, is a big crackdown on illegal gangmasters and people paying below the minimum wage as well. So that's important because this is all putting a depressive pressure on people's cost of living and their ability to pay their way. We think you need to have a high-skilled, high-wage economy, which is how we can lift everybody rather than, this mythical race to the bottom, which we can't win a race with China or India in terms of competitive manufacturing costs, right? It's just not going to happen. So we need to build a high-skill, high-wage economy instead so that we can properly float those boats. And that means that we have things like our house building program, 200,000 new houses per year by 2020. Is the target. That's great for the economy and growth as well, because construction, really important part of the economy, proper growth that ripples out throughout the economy far better than financial trickle down economics and things like that. And we're also going to put proper resources into the NHS to make sure that we'll have 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more GPs, 5,000 more carers, and 3,000 more midwives. I mean, we could talk about the NHS in a moment, but that's an important infrastructural issue to deal with. And what we're also going to do is deal with the issue of school places and things like that. So at the moment, the coalition government had a free schools programme. It's cost millions of pounds. It's largely resulted in schools being built where there isn't actually that much demand for school places. Whereas areas like Watford, there's a shortage of school places. We can see that, and people experienced that. Only a couple of weeks ago, those primary places were announced, and there's a shortage of them. So what we're going to do around that is we're going to end the free schools programme. We won't close any of the free schools that have already been set up, because again, that would be massively disruptive and not very helpful. Although we will insist that all teachers are qualified who are teaching in those schools, which is not the case at the moment. And we're going to use the money that we save to cap class sizes at 30 for 5, 6 and 7-year-olds. Now, the reason we want to do that is if you look at the relative performance of schools, fee-paying schools and the outcomes that you get there versus state schools and the outcomes that you get there, it largely is determined by the class of the size. So having that limiting effects on the number of kids that you can have taught in a class has got to be beneficial to their education and to their life chances and opportunities. So the other thing we'll do around education is appoint directors of school standards at a local level, and they will have the power to transparently commission schools where they are needed, rather than where people decide that they want to be when they want to be built, which would have the nod of the education secretary and stuff like that. So really important stuff that will help deal with some of those infrastructural problems that can be associated with those immigration arguments.
One of the things you touched on there that I just want to go back to is housing. Clearly, we're in London, the prices are ridiculous, but they're pretty ridiculous in Watford.
They are, yeah.
Social housing seems, for people to get on the house, it's a ridiculous marketplace, the housing market in this country anyway, but this is the only country in Europe that's got this huge problem with housing. But you've got this real desire to own a property, which with the mortgage rates as they are, is more cost effective than very often than renting, because the rental market's all about money and renting property, not providing someone with a home to live in. So there's a huge problem with the rental sector anyhow. But we clearly need more social housing. We've got, because there are going to be even more people that are unable to afford a house.
Yeah, I think that it's a really important point. We have a housing crisis. Let's not mince our words about it. We have a perverse situation in places like Watford where you're right, it can be cheaper to have a mortgage than it can be to rent. Rent was supposed to be the cheaper option of the two, right? And then you progressed to having a mortgage if you wanted one, or you could at a later date. But those people who are paying higher than mortgage costs in rent can't get a mortgage because of the crazy amounts of money they need to raise as a deposit. I think the average age of a first-time buyer is now 37, which is a pretty shocking statistic. And we're going to do something about that, and our plans do include provision for more social housing. So 200,000 houses per year is the target by 2020. Some of that will be, you'd have seen some of the announcements today around allocation for first-time buyers, to make sure that they have a fair crack of the whip, rather than just having foreign buyers and so on buying them up in order to be able to let them. We're also going to devolve further powers to local authorities so that they can increase the amount of social housing that they're able to build. We're going to have a use it or lose it policy around land that is being kept, often for speculative purposes, around development, property development potential. So all of this will mean that we're building half the houses that we need to be building in this country, and this problem is only going to get worse unless we do something concrete to tackle it. So that's what we're going to do, and I think it will really help. It is a struggle. I have a little daughter. I have no idea, if we carry on like this, how she's going to be able to afford to get anywhere. It is just a ridiculous situation, and it needs to be cracked.
We touched on the NHS, which is a massive subject, and we probably haven't got time to go into it in great detail. But you mentioned significant investment in the NHS, and clearly keeping it in the public sector is part of that deal, of course. Where's the funding for this expansion, if you like, in the NHS coming from?
So our proposals are that we will use a mansion tax on properties that, and let's be really clear about this, that were worth 2 million last summer. That mansion tax is going to help fund it, and we're going to have a levy on the tobacco companies as well, and that will pay for our proposed increase in staff in the NHS. Now, clearly, we're going to look for efficiencies there as well, but I think it is worth pointing out that the Simon Stevens report, chimes very, very closely with where Labour's thinking, with Andy Burnham and Liz Kendall, has been in terms of what direction the NHS needs to go in order to be able to save it. I mean, we have a situation at the moment where doctors and nurses are saying it can't survive another 5 years under the kind of regime that the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats have been running. I mean, we'll repeal the Health and Social Care Act from 2012 because it has been a disaster. I mean, you can see what's happened in terms of, A&E waiting times, ambulance turnaround times, ability to offer proper social care, ability to get a GP appointment within 48 hours. People's experience is going downhill, and we need to do something to solve it. And we will. Those proposals are concrete. I mean, and just a brief word, still we don't have a modernised hospital in Watford. It's been a big campaigning priority for me. It will be continue to be a priority of mine if I'm elected in May, and getting it modernised is my absolute top priority.
Fantastic. Just a couple of quick questions for you to sort of finish off with. What do you think people are going to? Is there a quite a percentage of people, do you think, that are going to go for tactical voting in this election? I mean, it is a very close election. I mean, I think the Watford campaigns are going to be reflected in what happens nationally. But there are people saying, if you vote for UKIP, it's a vote for this or vote for that. What do you think? I mean, is there going to be a large-scale tactical voting going on here?
Well, I mean, that's, of course, the magic question. And if you can get this one right, then you can tell me what the lottery numbers are going to be next Saturday as well. I mean, in all sincerity, clearly you can see that over the last few years, there has been, a fracturing of party loyalty and greater numbers of people saying that they're going to support parties other than the traditional normal large parties. Now, in terms of what happens at a general election, it's going to be fascinating to see whether that continues or whether that people coalesce again around more traditional voting. I think, my pitch is going to be, if you don't want a Tory government, then you need to vote Labour, because a vote for any of the other parties will just let the Tories get in again. So if you want a Labour government, you need a Labour MP in Watford, go out and vote Labour on May the 7th. But you can see that stuff is happening in a very complex way at a national level as well. And, I guess some people will go and vote tactically, but, tactical voting, you have to look at the outcome that you're trying to achieve and what the likelihood of that outcome is. So, it's not a wise decision, in my opinion, to do it. I think what is a better thing is that people who have those concerns, that mean they may be interested in voting for other parties, vocalize them and engage with us to be able to make sure that we can represent what those interests are. And I think that, that's something that is going to happen. I don't get the sense that it's going to, I don't get the sense yet that the model is shattered, the sort of traditional two-party politics. It's clearly taking a buffeting, and you've seen that obviously from the 2010 election and obviously from other incidences that have happened since. So, I've mentioned police and crime commissioners, which we're going to scrap and put that money into frontline policing. I think turnout in that election was about 16%. I mean, it was just, woeful. So there's a lot of problems to get over in terms of, the political landscape engagement with it, who people are going to vote for, and what the likely outcome of it is going to be. So, a tough one to crack. And we haven't even mentioned the SNP yet.
What have you got? I mean, you mentioned the Hustings earlier. What else have you got planned? Where can people bump into you between now and the week Thursday?
Right. So, well, there are the Hustings. So they're taking place tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday. And other than that, we're out and about all over the town. If you really want to get hold of me, then probably the best way to do it is to message me through Twitter. or phone the office on 270 St Albans Road, and I'll try and engage with you. I really do like to engage with people, and believe me, I'm getting loads of people emailing me and phoning me and all the rest of it. I don't have staff to help me deal with these inquiries, so please be patient. If you've got in touch with me, I will get to you. But yeah, I mean, I'm getting 200 to 300 emails a day at the moment, so you know, triaging that is pretty tricky when you're out and about all the time as well. But yeah, if you do it through social media, that's usually an easy way, because you can kind of do that on the move, and it's largely easier to respond to.
What's your Twitter handle?
It's just at Turmaine.
At Turmaine, okay. And final question, how's it going to go in Watford? What's the outcome going to be? The
outcome is going to be that we return a Labour MP as part of Ed Miliband's majority Labour government.
Good stuff.
Wouldn't expect me to do anything else, Chris, would you?
Thanks ever so much for coming on and talking to us. I think you know, it's good to get these videos done, and those people that don't get a chance to meet you to listen to what you've got to say and where Labour are on you know, on some of these thorny issues. So thanks very much.
And thank you very much indeed. It's an absolute pleasure to do it, as always. And you know, let's keep it going. Hopefully, it's getting people engaged.
Fantastic. All the best, and I'll no doubt see you out and about.
I'll look out for you on the high street, Chris.
Yeah, take care now. Cheerio.
All right. Okay, bye.